And welcome to Catholics Coast to Coast. I'm Ace McKay. Hope you're having a great Memorial Day weekend. 3 days to catch up on what's happening at Podcast Central and then find your favorites. That way you can subscribe wherever you like to stream or simply go to EWTN.com/podcast and then you're right in the mecca of what's happening at Podcast Central. Before we dive into this week's conversations, let's check in on our Mass readings with this week's Word on the Word.
So, you know the feeling that you get when someone is telling you that something big is going to happen, but they just kind of allude to it and not tell you straightforward.
Yeah, it's a weird feeling.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I get whenever I read this gospel.
Are we rolling?
Jesus.
Yes.
Melissa, you almost messed this one up.
Oops.
Hi, I'm Veronica, and this over here is Melissa. Welcome back to the Word on the Word. This week, we're going to break down the gospel for Sunday.
Like I was saying earlier to Veronica, Jesus is hinting at his ascension and Pentecost. He tells his disciples to not be afraid.
He also says that he is going back to his Father, but they should be happy for him. Have you ever felt happy for someone making a big change in their life?
Yeah, some of my friends moved away to go to a school that they really wanted to attend. It was difficult for me to say goodbye to them because I wanted to be around them. However, I knew that they were trying to do what was best for them. Personally, I moved away from my last semester of college, and it was hard to say goodbye to the friends that I'd made, but I knew that I was making the best choice for my future. I still keep in touch with a lot of those friends today and try to meet up with them whenever I can.
Well, this week, we challenge you to reach out to someone you haven't seen or talked to in a while. If they live nearby, go grab lunch or a coffee. Or if they're far away, pick up the phone and give them a call.
And we'll see you here next week. Bye.
Great conversation starter as you travel for Memorial Day weekend. More of Word on the Word is easy to find at Podcast Central when you go to EWTN.com/podcast or subscribe wherever you like to stream. Another great conversation happening this week as we continue Catholics Coast to Coast is Forte Catholic. Anyone who has ever gotten bored in Mass, or maybe you're still dealing with anger management issues and you just don't seem to get it under control. Well, the prodigal father returning to argue with Taylor about communion services, explanation of convalidations, and laughs at Taylor's flaws. Let's find out what those are as we check in with Forte Catholic on this week's Catholics Coast to Coast.
Hello there, and welcome to Forte Catholic. I'm Taylor Schroll, and that's the Priesty Boy. He's back.
Hi, friends. Hi, Taylor.
How are you?
I'm doing all right.
Where you been?
Oh, doing priest stuff.
That's what I heard. I know the excuse for month one why you missed. What was going on in month two?
You didn't, wait, did you? I just waited for you to, invite me on to the next show, and you just never did, I thought.
Oh, no, buddy. You see all those missed phone calls on your phone?
What?
I have
Ridiculous.
called you multiple times because it had been 2 months, so I wasn't just going to text you and be like, Tuesday, ? We hadn't spoken. I didn't know if you were busy or stressed or angry. I didn't know what was going on, so I kept trying to call to get a barometer of how you were. You finally answered last week, and you were at the gym, and you were like, yeah, I'm fine. And I'm like, then where have you been?
Well, that seems to be a horrible misunderstanding.
Month one, there was just a lot of people dying, and you're a priest, so you have to do their funerals. Perfectly fine. You were like, look, I need a month off. You haven't had a month off in forever. And then and then you came back to that Clerically Speaking podcast. Y'all do like an episode every 6 months. And then I did feel okay to text you, be like, what the hell? I'm glad you're doing better than I have assumed that you have been for the last month.
Been fine, a little busy. It's been okay.
Yeah. So I have saved priestly questions for you. This is going to be one of those nerdy Catholic episodes. Usually we're like, let's talk about silly stuff and, bring people in. I promise you this is for the people who like weird Catholic stuff. Because I have questions about Mass. I have questions about communion services. I have questions about convalidations. Oh, these are very, very popular words, or very unpopular words, very complicated words that I have questions about. And one of the questions that we're going to kind of build to is going to seem very silly, but I think I had a prophetic message in a match that I was in, and I have a question that you're not going to like, and you're not going to like that I'm right about it, but I think I am.
Okay.
Okay. So that's where we're building to, but we'll start with a little bit of an easy one that I may have asked you something like this before. But I thought about this because I'm constantly thinking about you in a positive light, except for the last month where I thought you were dying and you couldn't answer your phone. But the month before, I've told you about this man before. I don't think we've ever talked about this man on the show before. But
Okay.
It'll ring a bell for you, and I'll kind of bring everybody else up to speed. So there's this Catholic camp here in my diocese, and out at this camp, there's this retired priest that almost any time I see him, I end up texting or calling you some story about him, because what I think he is. How old are you?
I'm 35.
You're 35. He is. You are him. He is you in about 40 years. So
Okay.
whenever he retired, which is 10 years ago, so now he's 85, and I know that math is wrong, but I've known him for about 10. And when he retired at 75, as most priests do, he became the priest in residence at this Catholic camp. So I've seen him for years. I knew him at 75. Now I know him at 85. And there's been multiple times, and especially it's been very encouraging to me. And I've tried to share that encouragement with you. And I don't know if it's set in, but because you've been very honest here on the show. You've been very honest on Clerically Speaking that like not every single day as a priest is easy and loving. And
Yes.
I said yes to God once, and that means my life has been beautiful for the last 10 years or whatever, right? Like, like you've been very open and honest about it. But like every time I see this man, it gives me hope that you're going to still be a priest at the year of 80, like when you're 80 years old, because he's super sweet. He's so great with these kids. He still loves the Lord. He is, and like the sacrifices that he makes as a priest are incredible, because like his health is starting to, he's 85 years old. His health is starting to fail. And yet he still makes these sacrifices to be there. I've been told multiple times, Father might not be able to make it for Mass. We might have to do a communion service. Father won't be able to make it for adoration, so Deacon's going to do adoration. And actually, Deacon can't make it, so we're actually giving you the power as the retreat leader to do adoration, just without the benediction, all that stuff. So, incredible man. Well, the last time I went to Mass with him was about 2 months ago, right around the time that we last spoke, and there was another priest who's probably in his 60s, and he was the main celebrant, the main priest for the weekend. And you, in now 50 years, is in a wheelchair and con-celebrating the Mass. So explain con-celebrating. Why would you even do that? You have one magician. You don't need extra spells. Why would you con-celebrate something?
You're right. You don't need extra spells. So back in the day, con-celebration wasn't so much a thing. So each priest, if they wanted to say a Mass, they would say Mass on their own. That's why when you go in older churches, all those side altars are there, because multiple priests will be saying Masses at the same time. But with liturgical reforms, now there's this thing called con-celebration. The idea is basically that there's really only one priest. That's Jesus Christ. And we all share in his one priesthood. So it's kind of a way of displaying that. There's one principal celebrant, and the other priests con-celebrate. So celebrate with him. Because it's, once again, we're all sharing the same one priesthood. Really, it's Jesus Christ who's doing all the important things. So if there's one priest there, if there's 50 priests there, it's still just basically Jesus doing the thing. So it's a way of celebrating. So it counts as a Mass. If I can celebrate, I still have a Mass intention. It would fulfill obligations or that kind of thing as well. It's just kind of a way of sharing the priesthood of Jesus Christ. And we don't need as many altars. So there you go. Con-celebration.
My brain immediately went to, let's say you're exactly who you are, but you're 100 years ago. So you're back in the time where there's these side altars and everything.
Yeah.
I love the idea that either, whoever the leader, you're still the associate pastor wherever you are, right? So it's either the pastor or a bishop or whoever's in charge of you. This man saying Mass on the main altar, I could just see you being like, your Mass isn't good enough. I'm going to go do mine over here on the right small chapel. And it's just very funny to me that you could, the bishop's celebrating Mass, pastor's celebrating Mass. Nah, I'll do it myself over here.
Exactly.
Hilarious.
Yeah. So as a priest in the older rite, you could participate. Like you could act, even though you're a priest, you could act as a deacon in the priest Mass or act as a subdeacon, but you wouldn't be the priest for the Mass. You wouldn't have celebrated Mass that day. So that's why.
Oh.
You would participate in Mass, but you wouldn't have celebrated.
So it was useless.
Which part was useless?
Demoting yourself from priest to deacon or subdeacon, because then it didn't count
useless.
for
useless for me in a certain sense.
Yeah.
But helpful to the priest who's doing the big fancy mass.
Yeah, he can figure it out.
He probably could. He probably could have figured it out by himself.
Okay, so here's where one of my questions arise. This is the situation that I am in. The young priest, the young man in his 60s, was celebrating mass. The other priest was concelebrating, and he's in a wheelchair. So he wasn't like typically when it's concelebration, you're young and virile. I think that's an okay word to use. I may not know what it means, but
sure,
you're young and spry. Maybe that would say so. You're typically standing behind the altar next to the primary celebrant, whether that's your pastor for a big mass at your church or like the bishop if he comes to your parish for confirmation or whatever. You're typically standing like on his right or his left, that sort of thing. Well, this priest, because he's in a wheelchair, was in his wheelchair and was sitting like kind of, I was quote unquote sitting in the front row because I was doing slides for the music lyrics, and then I was standing next to the musician to kind of help him out. And then the bishop was essentially sitting right, or not the bishop, the older priest was sitting very close to us. And it got me thinking. First, does positioning matter? Because essentially he's kind of sitting with the crowd, but he's concelebrating. And like, I didn't know he was concelebrating until the Eucharistic prayer started and he's reaching out his hand over, he's doing all the motions, right? So I just thought, look, he's 85 years old. He's taking a Sunday off. Relax, But it got me thinking, in this situation, 65-year-old priest has a heart attack. And it maybe the answer is different at different stages of the mass. But let's say he has a heart attack during the gospel. The other situation that I'll also prepare you for is he has a heart attack in the middle of the Eucharistic prayer. Mm-hmm. Can that mass continue? Obviously, there's going to be, they're going to call the ambulance. The ambulance will come in. Like, we're not just going to leave him laying there, right?
It's going to be a whole thing.
right. But, like, I'm thinking about this, but, like, people drove hours to come to this mass because they're coming to come pick their kids up from this confirmation retreat. So, priest is there. We're out in the country. It's going to take 15 minutes for the ambulance to get there. Ambulance takes them. Obviously, traumatic event. But it's still Sunday. We still all have to go to mass. I'm sure the obligation could be lifted in this scenario. I'm sure somebody can figure it out. But dramatic scenario aside, something happens where the primary celebrant gets sick or dies or has to be taken away in the hospital or something like that. That priest leaves at the exact moment. Can the other priest who is concelebrating pick up right where he left off?
So I don't know if there's actual rules or prescriptions about that, but that's exactly what I think would happen. Okay. That the priest would just jump in. In the Eucharistic prayer, there's already you kind of see this a little bit in like a regular concelebration. There's certain parts where a concelebrant will take over and say the words for a certain part of the prayer. Right. That's an option they can already do. So it's not too much of a stretch to say, hey, that priest is indisposed for whatever reason. The other priest can jump in and continue the mass. I'm sure that's fine. It's actually probably what would be recommended for you to do. Yeah.
Okay, so same scenario, but there was not a priest concelebrating. So you're in your room playing Destiny 2 because you don't have the 11 o'clock mass because you celebrated the 9 o'clock mass, and your pastor or whoever is saying the mass at the church, literally right next to you, you could walk there and be there in a minute and a half. He gets sick and has to, same thing. Hospital, not the hospital comes. The hospital arrives. Incredible. No, the ambulance arrives, and you weren't concelebrating, but you are still a priest, and he dies 8 words into the Eucharistic prayer. Do you have to start over? Do you send people away? Or once again, can you just pick up where he left off?
That's interesting. I would assume that I could pick up where he left off. And I think that would be preferable, especially if like it took me like we're talking like 10, 15 minutes for me to get over there, throw on my vestments and jump in. I would probably do that. I would probably start at the beginning of the Eucharistic prayer. If it's only a few words in, I think it might get a little tricky if he is already like confected partially the Eucharist. So if he's like consecrated the hosts, but not the chalice, I think I would have to pick up where he left off. I don't know. That's a weird sort of scenario to happen. If that thing kind of happens, like, Jesus, can you please just keep this priest alive for like 2 more minutes? Is that hard to like?
It's really funny because what I thought you're going to say, Jesus, can you just not have our bishop find out about this so we don't have to answer this question?
Also both those things. Yeah. So, I mean, this is me kind of spitballing here. So this might not be official church teaching, but I would say, like, say he's consecrated the host, I would pick off where he left off. If he had just begun the Eucharistic prayer, is a few sentences in or whatever, maybe even already did the epiclesis, the kind of calling down the Holy Spirit, I would still start from the beginning just so it's clear about what's going on, what's not going on. I'm afraid of what question you're eventually going to ask is.
Oh, yeah, we're getting there.
I have an idea.
You're not going to die. I promise you're not going to die.
No.
You have to live to at least 85 and concelebrate in a wheelchair at a random Catholic camp. We have to get there at least. So, okay, here's my question, and I'm no setup whatsoever. Part of that last story was I was just curious, right? But you also defined some terms and helped us to get to this next question.
Yeah.
This comes from my experience. Both of these come from experience. I was wondering, what if this priest dies and this priest has to do it, right? But I was also at Ash Wednesday communion service. I did not go to mass because at our parish, and I think it's actually becoming quite popular, that there's like 2 masses a day and 8 communion services. One, to help. Two reasons: to help the priests, right? Because that'd be a lot of masses in one day. But then also to help people that want to come, even though it's not a holy day of obligation, it's still the second or third most popular day on the church calendar. People want to come, and they have work. Like, so we essentially have, anytime you want to come, you could come. There's 2 in the morning. There's 2 at your lunch break. There's 2 right after work. There's 2 very late if you work late. Like, there's just a ton of services. So this is where this question is coming from. So I went to a communion service and it's fine and it's approved. And then I've gone to every Sunday Lenten Mass and I'm like, why can't Sunday Mass just be a communion service? Meaning, you as the priest, at whatever you or your pastor, so let's just use your parish, right? You and the pastor, one of you is going to say Saturday night Mass. Why can't you or him at the first Mass consecrate you have 2,500 people coming to your Sunday Masses. Consecrate 2,500 hosts, and then either you or the deacons can do a communion service. It's I'm gonna shut up. I'm gonna shut up and ask why can't Sunday Mass just be a communion service?
Because Sunday Mass and communion services are different. That's the first and foremost thing. Sometimes people forget about this, but your Sunday obligation is to attend Mass. Your Sunday obligation is not to receive communion. Because let's say that you're in a state of like mortal sin, or you just haven't gone to confession in a long time. You don't have to receive communion. In certain cases you shouldn't, but you're still obligated to go to Mass. So first and foremost, a communion service is not Mass. But let's take a step back to the example we gave for Ash Wednesday, because this is important. For Ash Wednesday, I think it's more common to you'll have the whole Mass and distribution of ashes, or you'll have just a liturgy of the word and distribution of ashes. I am fairly certain that you should not have a bunch of communion services with distribution of ashes, because communion services are envisioned as this kind of emergency measure where you don't have a priest. So it's envisioned for, like, at a parish, it's a Sunday and all of your priests are sick. Or you're out in, like, the Congo and a priest doesn't visit you that month or whatever. Like, that's when you do communion services. They should not be done even during the week. Let's say, like, a regular weekday Mass, you don't have a priest for that weekday. You shouldn't probably do a communion service for that. It's actually not recommended. And even within the communion service, like, the idea of a lot of the prayers are praying for a priest. It's envisioned that you don't have a priest, right? So the idea is not to, because if you do communion services and you do them a lot, that begins to make people think, why can't we just receive communion? And it begins to lessen in people's minds the importance of the Mass. So the idea for a communion service is that you don't have a priest. So for something like Ash Wednesday, you would have, 2, 3 Masses, however many you can have with the amount of priests you have, and then you just have distribution of ashes. For Sunday, the idea is that you would have, the priest would say Mass. If people literally can't make it to any of those Masses because of serious reasons, like, of course, like families sick, you have to take care of them, or you're sick or in the hospital, or maybe perhaps like you're in a very tight economic situation and you have to go to work or else your family's going to starve. Like these are very realistic things that happen across America. Then you're not obligated to go to mass. It's sad. It's a bummer. We want to go to mass, but it would not be a sin in that case. But you wouldn't have communion service for the sake of convenience. It's for the sake of emergency. Does that make sense? That's why you wouldn't do it.
It does. And both scenarios. So one is a more maybe me scenario. The thing that you're not going to like is the second part. And I'll get there in a second. The first part is me being selfish. One, selfish for myself. I've been saying the word selfish as shellfish all Lent. And nice. I think it's just because we have fish on the brain. I've been doing it accidentally multiple times. I am selfish, but I also think, and I've talked to you about this, I've talked to other priests, and I still think that most of them are lying to me, because I guess I should believe in like the power of the sacrament of your priesthood, just like my marriage is way better than it should be because of the grace of the sacrament. Like I'm not very good at it, but somehow we're actually pretty good at it, you know? But me as a congregant, I'm only going to mass. I'm typically on average now going twice a week. I go Sunday, and then my wife and I have our new standing date on Thursdays where we go to mass and then we go out to lunch. Like that's kind of standard for me, right? And even going to just 2 a week, I get tired of the Eucharistic prayer. I get tired of that part because one of the things we love about Catholicism is the structure of the Mass. And I love the structure of the Mass, but in the first half, everything changes within the structure. It's different prayers. It is new readings. It is a new psalm. It is a new homily. It is all new. And then the second half, we mail it in, and it's the same stuff every single time. And it's so hard for me to pay attention because I kind of don't want to pay attention because I literally have it memorized. I'm saying every word with you. I'm celebrating Mass with you from the ninth pew because I know all the words and I'm tired of it. And I have asked priests, how do you not get tired of this? And they're like, oh, it's the Lord. I don't believe you. I don't believe you that it is not boring and repetitive because I'm only going twice a week. You're going 13 times a week. I don't understand how this is good for the congregation and good for our priests to do that specific part of Mass. I don't mean the whole Mass is rote. I don't mean the whole Mass is repetitive, but specifically the Eucharistic prayer. You have 3 options. Everybody has their opinions about which one's the best. There's still only 3, and we all have them memorized. I'm tired of it. Jesus said, do this in remembrance of me, and it didn't take 15 minutes of words.
All great points. Let's So it's interesting.
Here's the bread. Go love each other.
It was actually probably longer because he had to do all that other Passover stuff as well, and that's all very complicated. But anywho, so I would say, being very honest, I usually don't get bored of the Eucharistic prayer. It's not like boredom that I feel, but it can be like there have definitely been times where I can grow tired of Mass. Like, on my third Mass of the weekend, I know what my homily is going to be. I know what the readings are. That can be a bit of a slog. So in that sense, it's more of like just there's a monotony. There's a kind of boredom there, sure. But in general, I do have to watch out because for me, it's not like I get bored during the Eucharistic prayer, but it's so memorized that it's very hard for me to focus on it. Yeah. So my mind's wandering. It's kind of a typical thing. If I don't really take a lot of time to prepare for Mass, and a lot of times, sometimes you can't. Like during daily Mass, it's very hard for me to focus on celebrating the Mass because I'm thinking about like the 1,000 different things that I have to do that day. So I'm thinking about the meetings I have and will I have time for breakfast? So yeah, that's definitely a struggle. Real life. Not all the time, but pretty common. There are actually like 7 to 8 options for Eucharistic prayer. There are 3 main ones and the 4th other one, then a bunch of other goofy ones I've never used and probably wouldn't be able to say. So for like a weekend, I do try to mix it up for myself, I used to do Eucharistic prayer 1. That's the long one all the time. But honestly, I was like, you know what? I cannot focus on this long prayer for my third mass. We're going to use number 3.
Linus,
it's a little bit
Cletus, Pigpen. Oh, crap. That's the wrong one.
Yeah, exactly. my brother will do a thing where he just throws in random names of like the Beatles into the usually
Lenin, Stalin.
Wait, just like dictators. So I will mix it up just for my sake, like because I have only so much focus, so that's a real thing. But to be honest,
I'm glad to hear that you do that because it's like I just try to put myself in the priest's shoes. It's like I would have to do something like that so that I wasn't like going crazy. And like it's little stuff like this that I'm like I chose the right vocation because that's part of it that I just couldn't do because I'm done after 1. So I go to the second mass in the week and I'm like, ugh, same words again.
Yeah, and mass is tiring. Like, if anyone thinks like, oh, being a priest is so easy, go to 2 masses in a row. Just go to 2 masses in a row and tell me how you feel when you're done.
And wear a big heavy dress in the summer.
Oh my gosh, that's a whole nother level when you have AC. Oh my gosh.
How is Father Anthony still healthy? I've seen him eat. Oh, the albs or whatever they're called.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I will say like that's when I think of things that are difficult in the priesthood, a lot of times, like saying mass a bunch of times isn't high on the list of things that are a pain in the butt for me. It's just really not. So maybe some priests are holier than me and never have like mass exhaustion. For me, it's like, yeah, it's a thing I need to watch out for. I try to mix up the Eucharistic prayer. The more time I take to prepare for mass, it makes it easier to actually say mass and make it a prayer. But so I can see why priests are saying it's not a big deal because it's not like the biggest deal in my life, but it's there. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but that's my experience of saying a bunch of masses.
You're the only person I think has ever been honest. Maybe there's one person, like one other priest that's so dang holy that he actually means it when he says that he's never.
I'm sure there's like 1 or 2.
Right. But like I'm talking to like normal people like you in 30 years and they're saying like, no, it's fine. I'm like, no, it's not. You're a liar. Stop lying to me. Go to confession with me right now and I'll do this and it won't do anything, but you're a liar.
Let me just one more thing about that because that is as a pressure on priests that like I don't know if they may be lying. Who knows? I don't know. But I do know the pressure of being too honest with people and being afraid to like scandalize them because they're not ready for real Christianity quite yet. Right. You don't want to like completely disillusion them. But, like sometimes things are hard. Sometimes I'm not super excited to be a priest. Sometimes hearing confessions is annoying. Sometimes it's not just 3 hours of joy. Sometimes I'm really bored in there, or sometimes I get frustrated in there. You'll never know about it.
Very rarely getting good news in there.
Right. I'm not getting great news. I'm not hearing like great stuff all the time.
Somebody comes in, forgive me, Father, for I haven't sinned. It's been 3 weeks and I'm good. Hey, nice.
Yeah. So I think. Yeah, actually, that would actually make me more angry because, like, you're wasting my time. Get out of here! I can,
And just like Taylor said to the priest, you're lying.
Yes, exactly.
Here's an examination of conscience. Get back in line.
Yeah, you definitely sinned. If anything, confess wasting my time.
Right, exactly.
So, like, don't get me wrong. Like, people who are on the other side of confessional, they probably won't know that I'm cranky that day. They probably won't know it. But yeah, so any priest who says they never get frustrated with the holy things, either they're lying, just straight up lying because they're prideful, or they're just afraid to scandalize people, which is still lying, still not great.
That's probably what it is. And I get what you're saying. Like people who
they're new.
Yeah.
They're just new.
That's not the case. I've asked a lot of old priests. But
yeah,
I think it is that I could see the like not wanting to scandalize people being the reason for a lot of these guys because like I know them, they're good dudes and but like I get it, right? Like for a new somebody in RCIA, you're probably not gonna be like, yeah, I'm bored like 70% of the time in mass. You're not gonna say that there, but it's like somebody who works for you that's been a Catholic 15 years, me, It's like, dude, just be honest with me. You're ridiculous.
Sometimes you get bored.
I think about these things, right? Okay.
Overcoming boredom in the mass. Great stuff this week from Forte Catholic. You want to check out more of this conversation or ones you might have missed. Easy to do wherever you like to stream, or you can, of course, just go to EWTN.com/podcast. That way at Podcast Central, you know where you're going to find, in addition to all the great broadcasts and programs here on EWTN Radio. I am Ace McKay. Going to take a quick break, but when we come back, Fierce Athlete is helping us to find out what do you do when coaches abuse their team. And of course, it leads to a long term of trauma and effects. And Jennifer Sey, who is a former national champion gymnast, she talks and exposes a lot of what's happening in the widespread use of women's gymnastics. We'll get to that and how to heal through it in our faith when Catholics Coast to Coast returns.
The destination for great Catholic audio programming is EWTN Podcast Central, featuring the best of EWTN Radio, as well as faith-filled podcasts from our friends and affiliates across the nation, all in one place, all free. If it's central to the faith, you can find it on EWTN Podcast Central. It's like podcast heaven. Visit EWTN.com/radio/podcasts today.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Fierce Athlete Podcast. This is your host, Sam Kelly. And we have been doing this thing over the last year where we've been having these special episodes with incredible women who are joining us in the fight against men and women's sports, joining us in the fight to really protect women's sports. And today we're honored to have another one of those champions, those warriors with us. Jennifer Sey is an author, filmmaker, business executive, and retired artistic gymnast. She was a 7-time member of the U.S. Women's National Team and was the 1986 U.S. Women's All-Around National Champion. She was at the forefront of exposing the abuse in the sport of gymnastics through her first memoir, Chalked Up, which was released in 2008, and in producing the 2020 Emmy award-winning documentary film, Athlete A, which you can find on Netflix, which exposed Larry Nassar and connected him to the broader abuses in the Olympic movement. She had a very successful career in the fashion industry, ending as brand president of Levi's. And in 2020, she actually risked her reputation. We joke she's been canceled like 3 times. She risked her reputation, community, and friendships to speak up against the harm being done to children due to the extended closure of San Francisco public schools. And that has resulted in a documentary, which is currently in post-production, called Generation COVID, which talks about the harms being done to children, and which were done to children through those school closures. Most recently, she is now fighting alongside us as we fight against men and women's sports, and has recently launched her own brand, XXXY Athletics, which I'm so excited to share with you guys. She is a mother of 4 and currently lives in Denver with her family, where I got to meet her a few weeks ago. So, Jen, just so excited to have you. Thanks for taking the time.
I'm so happy to be here. I can't wait to chat.
Well, I am so impressed with you. It's just like this athlete mentality. I love it. You go hard after things, and you found a lot of success in your life. But I'd love to just start by talking about your gymnastics career. Obviously, a very successful career. Let's start there. How did you get into gymnastics? What are the lessons it taught you? And then maybe let's shift into kind of some of the abuses that you went through.
Sure. So I started gymnastics around, 1974, 1975. I'm old. It was just a couple years after Title IX passed. Title IX passed in 1972, and and I'm sure your listeners know, but it sort of provided sex-based protections to girls and women in the educational system. It's most known for its protection within sports, and it drove dramatic increases in sports participation for girls. Prior to 1972, there weren't really that many opportunities. And I would even argue in 1974, when I started, there still weren't that many. You just started to see programs popping up. But gymnastics became very popular in the 70s, and then it exploded even more so in 1976 when Nadia Comaneci won the Olympics, and I was obsessed with Nadia. She was a little girl. She was only 14. So it's not often you could see someone that you related to, not a grown up, but like a girl. Like she was charming and amazing and beautiful. And so I just became obsessed with gymnastics, and there were gyms popping up all over the country. And I was already taking classes, but I just begged my mom, I wanted more classes, more days. And I think, by the time I was 8, I made the club team. And by the time I was 10, I qualified for what is called the elite level in gymnastics. So, just 4 or 5 years in, and the elite level is what enables you to vie for a spot on the national team. That's like the highest level you can compete at. So, I was training 30 hours a week by the time I was 10 years old. I'd already moved to another gym because I wanted to get better. My local club team was not good enough. I always say I must have been a really impossible child to parent because I was just so driven and disciplined and hard on myself. But I also loved it. I mean, gymnastics it's the best sport in the world for a kid. You really do feel like you're flying. It looks like it, and it does actually feel like it. You sometimes meet the floor with quite force, a lot of force, and you realize you're not actually flying. But yeah, I mean, I loved it. And then I was on the national team between, 10 and 13, the junior national team. I started going to international competitions. And by the time I was about 13, I begged my parents to go to an even better gym because I was in the top 12 nationally for my age group, juniors, but I wanted to break into the top 6 before I became a senior, which is 15 and over. That was like a marker for me that could mean I could make world championships, Olympic teams, that kind of thing. So I did a little tour of the best clubs in the country. I went to Caroli's. I went to a club called Scats in Southern California, and I went to one in Allentown, Pennsylvania called the Parkettes. And I chose Parkettes for better or worse. They're all bad in some ways that are the same, in some ways that are very different. But those were the 3 best clubs in the country at the time. The vast majority of national team members came from those clubs. But I chose Allentown because it was closest to home. My parents lived in New Jersey, and at first my parents drove me 2 hours each way to go to this gym. And then eventually I moved there on my own and lived with a coach. And then eventually my whole family moved there. So this was, a dedicated family endeavor, and there's good and bad about that, which I can speak to. And I loved it there, and I moved up really, really quickly. I mean, I think my first nationals that I went to with Parkettes, I placed 7th, up from 12th, and then the next one I was 2nd. So, it did what I had hoped, and that it kind of catapulted me into that highest level. But it came with a high price. The training methods. I had been in a club that was supportive, a lovely woman who really treated the whole child and looked at sports as a way to develop the whole person. That was not Parkett. This was a brutal, abusive and bullying training regimen. I trained on broken bones. I was weighed 2, sometimes 3 times a day. My weight was announced on the loudspeaker. We were shamed and bullied for that. So that's the emotional and physical. Food was taken literally out of our hands. We had 1-2% body fat. I didn't even get my period until I was 19 years old. But we were constantly told, we were fat pigs, and, we weren't going to be allowed to go to the next competition because we were an embarrassment. And at first I kind of endured it, and I just sort of leaned into it, and I thought, this is what's required. I'm going to hand myself over to these people and they will give me what I want. But as you might imagine, it really wears on you over time. And I ultimately won the national championships in 1986. I was the national champion, and I had come back 9 months after breaking my femur. And it was on that night, 1986, after winning, that I began to unravel, I would say, because you can only endure so much, I think.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, first of all, I'm so impressed by your drive, right? Just from a young age, it seems like you just had this innate competitiveness, this innate drive, and also the beautiful support of your family, which I think today I get the sense, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, that it wasn't about your parents. Like, it was really about you and your drive and what you wanted to do, and they supported you. And I think today, and this might be an aside point, but a lot of times it's more about the parents than the kid.
this is a complicated thing. And my parents are awesome. But I think for a very long time, I've had fraught feelings about their commitment because they lost perspective too, and they would acknowledge the same. They did always support me, and I hid from them what happened in the gym and how brutal it was because I didn't want them to take me out. So, I don't blame them for that. And parents weren't really allowed in the gym, though this club was notorious for how poorly they treated the athletes. Everybody kind of knew it, but it became normalized in the community. It's like this weird world where anyone from the outside world would have seen it. They would have been like, that's really messed up. But in this world, it was like, well, that's normal. Of course, you only eat 300 calories a day. And of course, your coaches call you these terrible names. And that's just what it's like. And so they lost perspective. And then when I really came undone, in 1987, 1988, and I said I wanted to leave the sport, they were not okay with that. They're okay with me saying this. I write about this in the book. And I think they feel ashamed, honestly, that they lost sight of me as a person. From their perspective, we gave up a lot and our family gave up a lot. And it's a year, one more year, train for the Olympics, you'll regret it. But a year in that environment and in the life of a young person seems undoable. It really does. And I was really falling apart. I mean, I had a severe eating disorder and I had a broken ankle that I was training on, though we didn't know that it was broken. And living in that kind of pain really does a number on your psyche, not to mention that emotional abuse. And, I was a smart enough kid to know that environment, that wasn't real life. And I thought I could keep that abuse at bay. And when I walked out of the gym and left the sport, I would be normal. That's not what happened, because you can't help but internalize when you're treated that way. And so I had a very difficult time after leaving the sport. One, I didn't know who I was without it, which I think most athletes experience. And two, I just had, really low self-esteem, high anxiety, felt horrible about myself because I was told I was a piece of garbage for 4 years. So it was a long recovery process, and writing the book was part of figuring it all out and kind of getting better.
Yeah. I mean, what did that look like? Just because sitting before me, I mean, I see this strong, confident woman who has gone on to do amazing things. Not that you're defined by the things that you've done, as you said, but what did that, and I imagine some of our listeners, and I've worked with women who have been torn down by parents, coaches, the sports environment, and are kind of reeling as a result, right? Because those things do affect us emotionally, psychologically, physically. What did that process look like for you to kind of work through some of those things?
It was a very long process. I mean, honestly, my book Chalked Up didn't come out till I was 40. I started writing it at about 38. I wrote it actually very quickly, but then they delayed bringing it out till right before the Olympics. Everything looked very normal on the surface. I am quite stoic in the face of my own unraveling. I went to college. I tried to figure out in college who I was without the sport because I did not do it. And I was a very good student, but I was not a very curious or engaged student. I kind of figured out how to get A's and that was it. Like I didn't find a passion academically. And honestly, in college, I felt like I was in a retirement home. Like I was so tired from having trained so hard so long. And all these kids were there like ready to start their lives. And I was like, I need a rest. And I also needed to rebel a little. Gymnastics, almost more than any sport I can imagine, requires such obedience. And so I had to kind of push the boundaries a little bit and figure out, who I was without it. But I looked like a pretty normal college student, but more on the sort of rebellious end of college student. And I found, some politics and some, I started to find what was interesting to me academically, but I was afraid. I was not a confident student. So I had these sort of dreams of pursuing creative things, writing, filmmaking, but I didn't really take classes there. I was afraid I wasn't good enough, and I went to Stanford. I had terrible imposter syndrome, which I think is not for type A women. And I just thought any minute someone was going to peek around the corner and be like, who let you in? You know? And I had that all through my corporate career, probably up until about 10 years ago. Anyway, I graduated and I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I did odd jobs here and there. Had a kind of freewheeling, fun San Francisco life. And eventually I didn't like instability. I didn't like the odd job. So I took a job at an ad agency. And I kind of liked it. It's not how I saw myself in a corporate environment, but everyone's young and it's creative and I was good at it. So it was fun. I like being good at things. So that usually influences me.
Me too.
And I remember when I took the job, I said to my sort of 6 roommates or however many roommates I had to be able to afford an apartment in San Francisco, I better not be doing this in 5 years. You know, this is to tide me over till I figure out what I want to do. And lo and behold, 30 some odd years later, I was in the same field and very successful. But I got married when I was 30. I had 2 children in my early 30s and everything looked fine on the surface. You know, I continued to move up the ladder at work. I started working at Levi's in 1999. Everything looked fine, but internally, I wasn't really okay. I just was incredibly self-critical. Now, I had moved through the eating disorder. That I sort of willed myself to get over. Somewhere in my mid-20s, I felt like this is a real waste of time. It's a waste of my brain space. I identified as a feminist, which I still do because I think the simple definition is I believe in equality of opportunity for women. Even if you don't like the title, I think that's an idea that most women can get behind. And I felt like, and I was reading all the, feminist literature, and I was like, the values I claim to believe in are completely at odds with my obsession with how I look and placing my value and how I look. And all the things I want to achieve in my life are being obscured and pushed away by my obsessive calorie counting. And so I just woke up one day, I was like, I'm not doing this anymore.
Wow.
And it's interesting because I'd gone to therapists, about it. That didn't help. Nothing helped. It was literally just the decision to not do it anymore.
Wow.
And it was a process, but I stopped. Like all the bad behaviors, I stopped. Now, that didn't mean I was fully okay with how I looked. That really came with getting pregnant, honestly, and sort of having to accept this is what my body is for. And, but I did stop all the negative, bad behaviors somewhere around my mid-20s. But anyway, my life looked good. I had a successful career. I was a vice president at Levi's. I was married. I had 2 children, but I was incredibly anxious, felt terrible about myself all the time, had this imposter syndrome. And I sat down at about 36, 37 to try to write that all down. And that became the book. And writing it down made me realize how messed up the training environment was and how that obviously impacted how I felt about myself. And again, I sort of then willed myself to move past it. But I don't think I totally understood it until I wrote it all down,
Sure. And what happened then? I mean, you write this book, you kind of expose the truth a little bit. I mean, that's what 2008 is 12 years prior to when the documentary came out.
And 8 years prior to the Nassar story breaking.
Yeah. How did the community receive? Yeah.
It was awful. It was like, I felt triumphant. I'd done this thing. I also, didn't know how to write a book. And yet I sat down and through my sheer force of will and discipline, wrote one that someone, a major publisher bought, came out right before the Olympics. It was the first person account of abuse in the sport, the emotional, physical, and I touched upon the sexual abuse. I wrote about the coach who was the national team coach in the 80s, who I traveled around the world with. He did not abuse me. I avoided him like the plague. He did not like me as a gymnast. That certainly affected me as a national team member because he could choose who competed, who didn't.
Sure.
But I wrote about it because he raped one of my closest friends on the national team who I did end up going to college with. So you have to remember 2008 was way before Me Too. It, which for all its excesses did, I think, a lot of good. at first, and I was very supportive of it. I think it jumped the shark somewhere, but I think there was a lot of good. And having grown up around predators, I thought it was really important that women were able to come forward and tell these stories. Sure. But when the book came out, it was the early days of social media, so I did not understand what a pylon was. Who knew in 2008? No one. And boy, did I get one. And it was brutal. I mean, my teammates, the national team, the head of USAG would call and leave messages on my voicemail to tell me to stop talking about this. It's not like this anymore. That was the 80s. There wasn't any overt threat, but they were threatening. That made me laugh because I was like, I'm 40 years old. I work in corporate America. You think you can scare me? But the abuse and the insults and the you're a liar and a grifter and you're a loser, a bitter, angry ex-gymnast, as if even if that were true, that I was, they said I was a terrible gymnast, which I don't know what that has to do with anything, even if it were true. Does a terrible gymnast deserve to be physically and emotionally abused? Yeah. But that was the world. And it was just this horrible pylon. Now, the world outside of gymnastics and the Olympic movement opened their eyes, because you shine a light on this microcosmic world that is completely awful. Regular people go, yeah, that's not right. Yeah. But the pylon from my own community and my own friends, they would call in when I was on radio programs, say they were going to sue me, like all this awful stuff. We canceled readings because people were threatening, threats of violence, essentially. And, now I don't even take any of that seriously on social media because people are just kooky. But then I didn't, we didn't know. So it was scary. And at first I retreated, and I really sort of said, this is not an indictment of the sport. This is just my experience. But then the more they came at me, the more I realized I needed to push back even harder. Yeah. Wow. So I did start to push back harder. And I did start to say, this is an indictment of the sport. The sport is rotten to the core. Abuse is a matter of course. And I became quite loud about that, between about 2010 and when the Nassar story broke. And then, of course, I was called upon by the newspaper that broke that story because I was one of the only ones. At that point, it was me and a gymnast named Dominique Mosiano, who was 1996 Olympic gold medalist. We were the only ones talking about it. So, and I will say the Nassar story even blew my hair back. I knew that this abuse was bad, but that took my breath away. And for those that don't know, he was the doctor for Team USA Gymnastics for 30 years, and he abused over 500 athletes under the guise of medical treatment. And that's horrifying. But the way that USAG covered up for him for 2 decades, the FBI didn't investigate when it was reported to them. They just had to pay out a massive settlement. That, as with many things, the cover up was, more startling and just grotesque than the crime. So that's when I decided to make Athlete A, because I'd met a lot of the Nassar victims. I'd worked with the civil attorney in the case that represented many of them, and they trusted me because I'd been outspoken early. And what I wanted to do in the film, and I think we did successfully, and folks can watch it on Netflix and tell me, is USAG, when they finally admitted that Nassar had done these things, I mean, they had to. He got arrested and there was lots of proof, and he's now in prison for life. They wanted to make it like he's this one bad apple. The sport is fine now. And my point of view was, no, he's the inevitable result of a system that does not respect children, value the athlete, and just protects these men and their reputations and the reputation of the sport so they can drive sponsorship dollars. There had been reports since 1997 that Nassar was doing these things, and it was swept under the rug. And when the police investigation started, evidence was destroyed. I mean, it's like mind-blowing. So I wanted to connect his crimes to the broader culture of abuse in the sport, and I think we did that successfully. And in fact, in 2020, athletes around the world rose up and said, no more. And there were heads of federations that were fired across the world. So until the athletes demanded change, I don't think any real change was happening.
Wow. Wow. So incredible. Just thank you for your work to expose that, but not cower when resistance came.
Sports is a means to develop a whole person, and that's the great stuff coming out of this week's episode of Fierce Athlete. You want more on this one or ones you might have missed? Easy to do. Just find Fierce Athlete wherever you like to stream your favorite podcast, or go to EWTN.com/podcast so Podcast Central can keep you in the know. Hope you have a great rest of your Memorial Day weekend. I'll see you back next week. Remember to let God define who you are, and I'll see you with Catholics Coast to Coast.